Hi there and welcome to today's vlog. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm currently reading a little book which I find really interesting. It's this one by a guy called Matt Summerfield. It's called Don't Make History Change the Future. It's about how with our lives we can influence others for good and particularly for Jesus. But before I want to read a passage from the book, I'd like to relate to you something that happened quite a number of years ago now, before I moved to Leicester. It was while we were still a minister in Doncaster. And I was due to take an evening service, Sunday evening service, and I'd arrived, as I normally like to do, early to make sure everything's ready. I'm never one who likes to be last minute. I know we're all different. Some people thrive with last minute, but I'm not one of them. So I was arrived at the church early. There was not many people about, one or two of these church stewards wandering around getting things ready. And into the church, and the church entrance is the back, came this lady, and she looked around and saw me and dashed towards me. She was, I guess, a middle-aged lady. And she flung her arms around me. I said, "Oh, it's so good to see you." Now, I kind of, there's a vague recognition, but I didn't really know who she was, where she come from, although I'm not averse to being hugged by ladies, or gentlemen for that matter. In fact, we're missing hugs, aren't we, in our coronavirus situation, but that's another matter. Anyway, this lady hugged me and just said, "It's so great, good to see you." And I was kind of wondering what is going on. Who is this lady? Why is she hugging me? Why is it good for her to see me? And then she explained that way back, a number of years earlier, I'd been a minister from the time I was a minister in Stoke-on-Trent, and I'd taken a baptism of a young girl, very young girl, baby, and this lady was the young girl's grandma, and she'd been at the service, and for some reason, that service and the memory of her granddaughter being baptised had stuck in her mind. It'd always been a treasured memory for her. And so to meet all these years later, the minister who took that service, was for her a great joy. And she told me about her granddaughter, how she'd grown up and developed, and all about her life. So it was really good to meet up with that lady, even though the baptism itself had faded from my memory. And it's interesting, isn't it, how an event, something you're involved in, can affect other lives in really significant ways. And so that's where this story comes that I'd like to read you from this book. It's not a made-up story, it's an actual, it's really a chain of events. And it starts off with someone whose name you probably won't have heard of, although you may have just heard the story. And Matt Summerfield in his book begins by asking the question, how do you change the future? And his answer is one life at a time. If we can influence one person in a significant way, that well may have repercussions down through the years and in ways that we cannot fully understand at the time. And it begins in the year 1858. A Boston Sunday school teacher named Kimball, I think his first name was Richard, but I'm not sure, began visiting one of his students at a local shoe shop. The lad worked there as a clerk. And as Kimball regularly visited this young lad, I had the opportunity to share with him about the love of God and about Jesus. Eventually, he led the young boy to faith in Christ. And the young man's name was D.L. Moody. Now, you will probably have heard of D.L. Moody. He grew up to become a very powerful and well-known and influential evangelist. In fact, you may have heard of Moody and Sankey, their campaigns. D.L. Moody was the preacher, the evangelist. Ira Sankey was the one who wrote the songs and the hymns to go with Moody's evangelistic campaign. They had a great ministry together. 21 years later, D.L. Moody found himself in London, leading a great spiritual awakening, a time of mission and evangelism. There was a local minister there in London whose name was F.B. Meyer. He went along to hear Moody preach and was really profoundly moved and affected by hearing about God's call on the man. And that was a really significant and influential time for F.B. Meyer. Now, some years later, Meyer himself went to the United States, where a young student by the name of J. Wilbur Chapman became a Christian at one of Meyer's evangelistic campaigns. So you see how the tide of events is flowing in the influences of people on people. So in one of Meyer's campaigns, evangelistic missions, J. Wilbur Chapman became a follower of Jesus. Now, Chapman became very heavily involved in the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, and during that period he met and discipled a former baseball player called Billy Sunday. Now, Billy Sunday became another great evangelist, and during one of his missions in a small town called Charlotte, led many people to Christ. Now, the following year, the people who had found Christ at Billy Sunday's mission or crusade organised another crusade, and they invited the eminent evangelist at the time called Mordecai Ham to speak, to come and be the one who brought the message. Now, Ham was rather discouraged with that 3-week mission, and he left the town really discouraged, really downhearted, because only a handful of people had come to Christ during his mission. But one of the new Christians, one of the few who had responded, was a young man called Billy Graham. And Billy Graham went on to lead literally millions of people to Jesus all around the world. And in the book, Matt Summerfield sums it up by saying this: the point of the story is ultimately not about Billy Graham. It's about an unknown school teacher called Kimball, who nearly 100 years earlier committed to invest in D.L. Moody. Just one boy, one life. Because Kimball did that, he changed the future for millions of people. How do you change the world? Asked Summerfield. How do you change the future? One life at a time. We can all do that, can't we? What an inspiring story. What an encouraging story. And the truth is, we are all, whether we like it or not, influencers. With our lives, with our words, we influence others. Our children, our friends, our work colleagues, whoever. How wonderful to be an influencer for good. How wonderful to influence somebody, to help somebody along that journey to discovery of the love of God in Christ. So there's a challenge for you and for me. Who by our lives are we influencing? And how are we influencing them? We can change the future, one life at a time. So God bless you in your life of being an influencer for Jesus. May his Spirit work in you and through you to draw others to himself. God bless.